Hello everyone, it's Monday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Last Thursday, South Korea and Japan took their first steps toward restoring bilateral ties as President Yoon Suk Yeol held talks with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. The summit not only has significant meaning politically, but economically as well. Japan removed its export curbs on certain key materials to South Korea. This was over 3 years after the measures were imposed as Japan's retaliatory action against the South Korean Supreme Court's ruling that ordered Japanese companies to pay compensation to Korean forced labor victims. South Korea also withdrew its complaint filed with the World Trade Organization against Japan for its restrictions. Both agreed to continue talks to reinstate each other to their whitelists of trusted trading partners. In what ways could both economies benefit from such decisions? For an in-depth analysis of what impact there might be on both countries from the restoration of bilateral ties, we invited Song Young-kwan, Senior Fellow at the Korea Development Institute. Dr. Song, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and we also have Sayuri Shirai, professor at KU University. Professor Shirai, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, first question to you, Professor Shirai. Japan in 2019 imposed export restrictions on 3 materials critical for the production of semiconductors and flexible displays. Now, for our viewers who might not be so familiar with items, could you tell us what these items are and why they are so important?
Yes, so these 3 items include like hydrogen fluoride and resistant others. And then, for example, in the case of hydrogen fluoride, looks like there are several types depending on the degree of purity. And so high purity one is used for the production of semiconductors, but other types can be possibly used for the production of mass destruction and other weapons, and possibly maybe uranium enrichment. So, and since the Japanese exporters are exporting both to Korea, so I think Japanese government find it a bit have to be more careful in terms of giving approval to these items because of the deteriorated trust. So up to this July 2019, when the Japanese exporters was exporting to Korea, so the Japanese government gave us 3 approval all at once. But since July 2019, so Japanese government decided to approve case by contracts. So since it takes about 90 days to get approval, so it's more time consuming and problematic.
Right, I see. Thank you, Professor Shirai, for your brief explanation. Now, Dr. Song, the breakthrough agreement to remove export curbs came nearly 4 years after Tokyo's initial decision. Experts say the impact will be quite limited, though, as developments in South Korea lowered the dependence on Japan for these items. Is this really true?
Yes, that's the general assessment in Korea. When the Abe government announced the export restrictions that excluded Korea from so-called the whitelist in 2019, there was a lot of concern that they would have a significant negative impact on the Korean economy. But as it turned out, the actual impact on the Korean economy, as well as the semiconductor industry, was pretty minimal. 2 factors. First, effort to diversify import sources for the 3 items. For example, we are able to secure the supply of hydrogen fluoride by shifting to import from Taiwan and China instead of relying on Japan. Second, progress in domestic production for the 3 items. We managed to produce hydrogen fluoride and fluorinated polyamide domestically. In 2020, the U.S. chemical company DuPont expanded their factory in operation in Korea to establish a production line for photoresist for extreme ultraviolet lithography. So in 2022, the Korean Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said that there were no supply disruptions in the 3 same items after Japanese export restrictions. And there were achievements such as the decrease in Korea's dependency on Japan for 100 key items in the material parts and equipment industry, and an increase in sales for Korean small and medium-sized companies.
Right. It is certainly good to hear that South Korea has increased capability to develop such items. But Dr. Song, even if we are not that dependent on Japan for these items, a lot of experts say that Japan's removal of export curbs is considered significant not only for South Korean chip makers, but also for the South Korean economy overall. How is this so?
Well, as I said before, the lifting of Japan's export restrictions wouldn't have a major impact on the Korea economy. It's important to note that just because Japan put export restrictions in place, it doesn't mean that those same items cannot be exported to Korea. Rather, the export process was become more complicated and difficult. That has led to a decrease of about 25% in the import volume of the three restricted items. Specifically, for hydrogen fluoride, which was successfully localized in Korea, the import from Japan dropped significantly from around 42% in 2018 to about 8% in 2022. So what that means is that with the lifting of Japan's export restriction, the export process will become simpler, which will lead to a reduction in administrative cost and allow for stable supply. Small and medium-sized enterprises that have successfully localized materials are worried that demand for Japan's material will increase again. Some have also noted that we need to be careful since Japan's recent action does not fully reverse the export restrictions to Korea. Even if Japan lifts the export restrictions, there is also a possibility of diplomatic disputes arising, and there would be a supply crisis for other reasons. That's why it seems like the effect to localize material production will continue.
Right. We need to keep our efforts to localize the production of the key materials. Now, Professor Shura, I'd like to also tap on Japan's point of view. How are Japan's business sectors affected by the export curb? I mean, in what way will lifting these restrictions impact Japanese companies?
I think this lifting this restriction on with regards to these three items, like Professor said, I don't think there will be any major impact because already South Korea, increased competitiveness. They can produce high quality one domestically, and they diversify from Japan to China and Taiwan. So that structure is unlikely to change. But at the same time, from Japanese manufacturers' point of view, I think there are some concern that I think Japanese greatly appreciate President Yoon's this leadership, but I guess Japan side is not clear whether this stance will continue in the foreseeable future, depending on the Korea's government. So we don't know that. So I think Japanese side also feels some uncertainty.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Song, moving on to the next agenda, recovery of the fast-track trade status has not yet come, though it is said to have been discussed, and it will be discussed in the near future. But what is the so-called whitelist, and how did South Korea's removal from the list affect the South Korean economy until now?
The whitelist of Japan, which is also called the Trusted Trade Control List, is a list of countries that they get the special treatment in terms of export controls for certain strategic goods, technologies, and materials. It means that if a Japanese company wants to export such items to a country on the white list, the export procedures are generally easier and more straightforward than exporting to countries that are not on the list. The Japanese government reviewed and updates the list regularly. So ending Korea's white country status would mean that Japan could limit export of sensitive products to Korea on national security grounds. Since Japan excluded Korea from the white list, it has a limited negative impact on the Korean economy. as countries try to diversify its import sources and localize production, as I said before. However, this matter has a significant negative impact on the trade relationship between the two countries, especially in industries that require stable supply chains due to uncertainty and increased administrative cost. The import transition effect of the three items that are subject to Japan's export restrictions led to a significant decrease in imports from Japan. While this has a more negative impact on Japan than Korea, it also increased production cost in the Korean semiconductor industry.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Shirai, so if this uncertainty gets disappeared due to the return to the whitelist of favored trade partners between two countries, what significance and benefits would this have for both countries?
So in this certain segment of this semiconductor industries, certainly Korea gained competitiveness, maybe more competitive than Japan in some area, and so also at this moment, recently Japanese government invited TSMC, a Taiwan company, to open factory in Japan, and then at the same time, I think recently the 8 Japanese company created a new company called Rapidas. With the technical support from IBM. So they also try to produce semiconductor in Japan, but in not the same way as Korea and Taiwan is doing. So this Japanese new semiconductor company try to diversify away. So not direct competition with that Taiwan and Korea. But having said that, so there is some rivalry here. But at the same time, Japan is good at producing semiconductor production machinery, and then I think there are many areas that Korea and Japan can cooperate. For example, getting precious metal, precious material. Which are used for the semiconductors. I think both countries can support each other to diversify those materials, because most of those materials are processed in China. So there is a concentration risk. So two countries can do a lot of collaboration in this area.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Song, let's shift the gears a little bit here. The Korean Federation of Industries and the Japan Business Federation, known as the Geiranren, hosted a Korea-Japan Business Roundtable. And apparently it was the first time in 20 years that chiefs of South Korea's top 4 conglomerates were all present. What significance did this business roundtable have?
Well, this is an important event because it gave business leaders from both countries a chance to talk about issues related to their trade relationship, which is mutually dependent. The meeting was especially important because the two countries have been having diplomatic tensions due to export restrictions and other issues. The purpose of the roundtable was to find ways to improve economic cooperation and address concerns raised by businesses on both sides. It also helped to build trust and promote dialogue between the private sectors of the two countries. This could be a positive step toward easing tension and creating more opportunities for cooperation in the future.
Right, so it offered a significant meaning as it provides, a place to build trust again. Now, Professor Shirai, President Yoon Suk Yeol was also present at the Business Roundtable, and he called for close cooperation between businesses from South Korea and Japan, especially in cutting-edge fields like batteries and electric cars. In what ways do you believe it's possible to boost ties in these sectors?
Yeah, so going back to what I said about these precious metal and materials, both are used for the semiconductor and the EV and batteries. And then, for example, copper is produced in Chile mostly, but processed in China. lithium produced in several countries, but also produced and processed in China. So there is a concentration risk with regards to the processed material. So Japanese company and Korean companies together with the support from both government, and they can do a lot of foreign direct investment to diversify away from China with regards to this material. But in addition to that, I think Japan and Korea can collaborate on promoting reuse or recycling of these precious metal, and also they can develop the substitute, so that they don't need to depend a lot on those like rare earths and precious metal. But all those development require a lot of technology and money. And since Japan is having an aging program, and our market is no longer growing, and it's very costly. And I think Korea is also have an aging program. So these two countries can work together and bring money and technology to diversify away and try to produce this substitute and also recycling technologies. Those are the areas I think that two countries can do a lot.
Right, I see. I mean, it's quite interesting to hear that there could be many sectors the two countries could collaborate with each other. Now, Professor Shirai, one more question to you. The two countries also newly launched the Korea-Japan Economic Security Dialogue at the National Security Council level. And as far as I know, this is quite a different one from the trilateral U.S., South Korea, Japan Economic Security Dialogue that had its first meeting in Honolulu this February. What economy-related topics are likely to be discussed through this channel?
So, in terms of this military and self-defense corporations, definitely U.S. is in center because we have a basis, Korea and Japan has a military basis of the U.S. So U.S. is important, but at the same time, Japan and Korea are facing a direct threat from North Korea, and there is a growing conflict between U.S. and China. So Japan and Korea are in a similar situation, right? So I think, also we are having this serious aging problem, and we need to definitely to develop more diversified supply chain network. So I think in that sense, of course the U.S. is important, but I think that Korea and Japan have a similar agenda. And so I think they can do, different type of deeper collaboration, especially like economy of scale. As I said, Japan's economy is number 3, but the economy is not growing anymore. And then South Korea has an Asian program. So working together, we can create a bigger market and exploit economy of scale. Those are the very important things.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Song, I think this could be our last question, but some experts say in order to tackle global supply chain disruption, South Korea would need to effectively take part in economic frameworks like CPTPP and IPF. Now, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, absolutely. As you know, Korea heavily relies on international trade, especially in exporting manufactured goods such as electronics, automobile, and steel. Its economy is deeply linked to the global economy, and trade makes up a significant portion of its GDP, around 80%. So it's very important for Korea to join both the CPTPP and IPEF. Negotiations are already underway for Korea to become a member of IPEF, but there's a problem with the CPTPP. Even though Korea has been openly expressing its desire to join for a long time, it hasn't submitted an application yet due to domestic political issues. If Japan were to actively support Korea's entry into the CPTPP, it would be very helpful for Korea to join. Cooperation between Korea and Japan would be more beneficial than conflict, just like any other countries. However, their long-standing historical issues are impeding the progress of both nations, and resolving this problem is not an easy task. The 1965 Korea-Japan Treaty, which normalized two countries' relations and caused the conflict between the two countries, During the process of signing in, Korean people strongly opposing, and Park Chung-hee government even has to declare martial law to suppress the opposition in 1964. Even now, there is still much criticism of the treaty in Korea. I hope Japan understands this and change its attitude from everything was settled with the 1965 Korea-Japan Treaty and follow Japan's attitude toward war crime. Many Japanese intellectuals already seem to share this view. Of course, Korea should also make an effort to understand Japan's position as well. When the understanding between the two peoples deepen, the two countries can truly move beyond the conflict and toward the future. Thank you.
Right, I see. I'd like to ask more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Dr. Song and Professor Shirai, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is all for Within the Frame tonight. We will be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching and goodbye.